The most horrifying scenario for a newborn baby horse is when a group of hungry and relentless wolves closes in on its delicate, defenseless body without anyone there to defend it. When all hope seems lost, survival appears to be impossible. Join us for an engrossing tale of peril, bravery, and an unlikely hero as something genuinely impossible happens, and what happens next will leave you dumbfounded. Under the waning light of the setting sun, the forest's enormous expanse seemed to go on forever. A faint but distinct sound echoed from a small clearing where a young foal, only a few weeks old, stood alone with its white eyes darting nervously. The baby horse was a striking chestnut with a white blaze. The tall pines swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting long shadows on the ground among the foliage. The night before it had wandered aimlessly with its small legs shaking with exhaustion, its face shivering despite the warmth of the evening after being separated from its herd after a sudden thunderstorm. The weight of its solitude was pressing down like the dark clouds looming above, unaware that the fall danger was closing in deep. The F froze, its ears twitching at the faint rustle of leaves, its nostrils flaring as it caught a strange, sharp, and predatory scent. In the shadows of the trees, a pack of wolves, lean and hungry, had caught the scent of the foe's vulnerability. Their leader, a large gray wolf with a scar across his muzzle, signaled with a low growl. Slowly, the pack started to spread out. Their movements coordinated in silence as they encircled the clearing. The fool instinctively attempted to flee as a low growl disturbed the stillness, sending a shiver down its spine. However, its weary legs gave out, and it staggered to the ground from the edge of the woodland, where an unlikely witness saw the sight. The villagers called the towering black stallion, which had a powerful physique and a coat that gleamed like polished obsidian, Midnight. The stallion was the leader of a tiny herd that prowled the margins of the forest. In his lifetime, he had witnessed many dangers, including storms, animals, and even people, but nothing had roused his senses more than seeing the defenseless wolf encircled. As Midnight stomped a strong hoof, his ears pushed back, the sound reverberating like a warning drum, is piercing. The stallion's nostrils flared and his muscles stiffened as he took a step forward to assess the danger, and the wolf's eyes focused onto them as they circled closer to the shaking foe. The wolves ignored the stallion's approach, concentrating only on the foe. With a desperate whinny, the pack leader squatted low, preparing to lunge the F. Its tiny voice, scarcely discernible above the rustling leaves, was a scream for assistance, even though it seemed hopeless. However, at midnight that cry was heard, and with a thunderous roar that split the air, he launched himself into a gallop, his hooves hammering the ground with the force of a rolling storm. The wolves turned their heads in time to see the stallion descending on them after being startled by his unexpected rush. The speed and sheer enormity of Midnight were breathtaking. The black stallion lowered his head, his piercing gaze focused on the pack leader. The wolf growled and held its position for a few seconds before comprehending the overwhelming force coming its way. Midnight raised his strong hooves, slicing through the air before smashing down with such ferocity that the wolves were scattered, their instincts divided between self-preservation and hunger, fearing something. With his head raised and his eyes blazing with defiance, Midnight stood erect, while the enemy lay behind him, its frightened body protected by the seat's enormous frame. Another fierce neigh was released at Midnight, challenging the wolves to move. The horse wasn't alone, though, as the wolves rallied their hunger and challenged Midnight's authority. Long rustling noises from the trees announced the advent of an unexpected ally. Who or what would arrive at midnight and the foe's assistance in this life-or-death situation? Midnight maintained his position. Every muscle in his body was taut to be ready as the wolves circled him, their low growls filling the clearing. The pack leader, with its scarred muzzle bared its teeth, inched closer to the trembling foreground behind Midnight. The air was thick with tension as a battle of wills between predator and protector played out. At midnight, Midnight stomped his hooves, his deep resonant neigh echoing through the woodland as a warning that should not be disregarded, but the wolves were. The wolves recoiled as the pack leader, whose hunger had overcome their caution, pushed forward, testing Midnight's determination. The horse raised his strong hooves, slicing through the air before crashing back to the earth, briefly withdrawing, but it was obvious they weren't finished. Midnight was not alone as a smaller figure emerged from the deep underbrush, its motions catching his attention as his keen eyes swept the forest's perimeter and his ears perked up at the slight rustle of leaves. Although coyotes were usually thought of as scavengers and opportunists, Midnight instantly recognized the creature as Ember, a rogue coyote who had frequently wandered close to the edge of his herd's territory. It was a lean, agile coyote with a coat that shimmered in hues of gold and gray. Ember had a reputation for being unique. She was a recluse who had gained Midnight's respect by avoiding close contact and never offering prayers for the weak. With quick, piercing eyes, Ember sprang into the clearing to evaluate the situation. The pack leader snarled and lunged toward Ember, but she was faster and darted to the side, her movements precise and calculated, drawing the wolves' attention. Away from Midnight, and the fall Ember's agility was mesmerizing as she weaved through the pack, her sharp yips and snarls creating chaos among the predators. The wolves growled, their attention momentarily diverted by the new arrival. Ember let out a piercing yip, a sound that cut through the tent like a blade. Midnight didn't stir, though, telling him to trust her presence. At midnight he turned, to face the fox and gently nudged it with his muzzle to rise up. His body language appeared to indicate that the FO was shaking, but it recognized the need and strained to stand up, and Ember continued her audacious performance. Midnight positioned himself next to the foe, protecting it as they started to move, with Ember snatching at the wolves' heels and guiding them out of the area, saving them valuable time. After Midnight led the F to a safer area of the forest, the FO staggered, its legs weak and unsteady, but Midnight stayed close, gently but firmly encouraging it to move forward. The pack realized they were being outwitted and turned their attention back to Midnight, and the fall Ember gave another sharp yip, placing herself between the wolves and her newfound allies. The pack leader hesitated, its scarred muzzle wrinkled and frustrated, but this time the odds had changed. The sound of hoofbeats sounded in the distance, and the commotion alerted the wolves to the fact that the united herd, led by another powerful mare, was emerging from the trees like a cavalry charge. The wolves were outnumbered and outmatched, and the pack leader let out a frustrated growl before withdrawing into the shadows. One by one, the wolves vanished, their howls faintly echoing as they left the clearing, silence falling. Ember stood a few feet away, her golden coat streaked with dirt, but her posture was proud. As Midnight turned to her, his deep eyes finding hers in a wordless acceptance of appreciation, the foe now leaning against her, aside from the foe's hard breathing and the horse's soft snorts. As the herd surrounded Midnight, the fall Ember started to retreat, her work completed. She looked back once her keen eyes met Midnight's, before vanishing into the forest's shadows, and Midnight, who was supporting her, let out a soft whinny sound of relief and safety. Midnight watched her leave, knowing that their paths might cross again. The herd slept peacefully that night under a blanket of stars in a protected glade. The FO was finally able to sleep soundly, but the memory of the day lingered until Midnight had protected his own. However, the unexpected alliance with Ember had reminded him that even the most unlikely bonds could lead to salvation. As the herd regrouped and the forest settled into quiet, a new challenge loomed. The F's ordeal had left it weakened, and the journey back to safety was fraught with uncertainty. Would they reach home before another threat emerged? The first light of dawn spilled over the forest, painting the trees in soft light. With their figures moving like shadows through the glade, the herd stirred slowly in hues of orange and yellow. At midnight they stood vigilant, their dark eyes searching the woodland for any indications of lingering danger. The creature, which was still curled up against his side, wobbled a little as it tried to stand. The previous day's events had worn it down. The herd went in a protective configuration, their presence of shield against the unknown, understanding that the storm would make the journey home difficult. The tiny body was marked by tiredness, and its movements were tentative and shaky as midnight softly prodded it. His massive frame radiates peace and reassurance surrounding them. They knew they couldn't stay in the glade for long because the scent of the wolves was still present in the air, and the forest predators would not think twice about taking advantage of any familiar trails because it had changed the terrain and dispersed the herd. The stallion's keen instincts guided him through the maze of trees and uneven terrain, causing the FEO to stumble frequently. Despite this, Midnight's quiet snorts and occasional prods seemed to send a straightforward but impactful message. Midnight took the lead as the herd started to move, with the FO at his side. Even though there was unspoken tension, the group felt united and determined to see the herd fall safely back to the safety of the plains. The herd followed in a tight formation, their hooves crunching softly against the forest floor. The older mares occasionally looked back at the group, keeping their maternal instincts on high alert. Hours went by as the sun rose higher in the sky, and the foe's breathing became labored and its movements slowed. Midnight stopped at a tiny stream that sliced through the forest, its clear waters glistening in the sunlight. He lowered his head and drank deeply before urging the foe to follow suit. The cool water seemed to slightly revive the foe, giving its legs new strength as it drank. They rested by the stream for a short while before the sound of rustling leaves caught Midnight's attention, causing his ears to prickle forward and his body to tense as he looked around the trees, the herd's movements. They froze while they awaited the midnight signal from the bushes. A familiar figure appeared, Ember, the rogue coyote who had aided them the day before. Ember approached cautiously, her sharp eyes flickering between Midnight and the fall. She stopped a few feet away, and her low, non-threatening posture made Midnight not move his gaze steadily as he watched her. Ember let out a soft whine, her body language indicating that she meant no harm. The stallion gave a low snort, a sound of acknowledgement, and then turned back to the foe. The presence of the Ember seemed to embolden the foe, who took a few cautious steps toward her. The coyote remained motionless, allowing the FO to sniff her cautiously for a moment. Ember answered with a low yip, her tail wagging slightly as she stepped back to give the entire area space, her fear replaced by interest. Midnight intently observed the exchange, his senses striking a balance between caution and trust. Ember had shown herself to be an ally, and as the herd returned, her presence looked less menacing and more reassuring. Their path. Ember trotted along them. Her motions were gentle and unobtrusive, and she maintained a respectful distance while keeping her keen senses on the lookout for any peril. The herd felt relieved when the forest started to thin out and give way to open fields bathed in the warm glow of the late afternoon. Midnight's pace quickened slightly as he led the foe through the last portion of their journey using strong strides. Ember stopped at the edge of the forest to watch as the herd moved toward the open plains, and the FO stopped and gave her a small, hesitant look. Winnie Ember dipped her head, her amber eyes soft with comprehension, and gave a final yip before vanishing into the forest shadows. Her work was done, and as the herd arrived in the protection of their house, Nighttime let out a triumphant neigh, his voice echoing across the plains. The filly, who had grown a bit taller, leaned against him for a moment before trotting in the direction of the other mares. The danger was past, and the herd was once more complete as they resumed their daily routine. They couldn't get rid of the notion that their journey had only just begun and that they still had a ways to go. More important than he thought, the herd had returned to the comforting protection of the plains. The vast open space provides a feeling of liberated liberty and safety. Despite still appearing feeble, the enemy had started to move around under the mare's watchful gaze. Midnight stood on a slight elevation, scanning the horizon with his strong figure outlined by the setting sun. Though the herd grazed quietly, the events of the previous days lingered in his memories, including the wolves, the storm, and the unexpected assistance from Ember. The stallion's instincts warned him that their difficulties were far from finished. When Midnight heard a faint but distinct sound, the rhythmic pounding of hooves, his ears perked up, his body stiffened, and his keen eyes scanned the horizon, but he initially saw nothing. Then, out of the shimmering heat of the plains, a group of horseback riders emerged. The human's swift approach sent a ripple of unease through the herd, and the mare's movements became restless as the riders approached. As Midnight drew closer, he gave a deep snort, indicating to the herd to assemble. The enemy, still unsure and vulnerable, trotted to Midnight's side, its wide eyes full of fear. Midnight then positioned himself defensively, using his towering frame as a shield against the approaching threat, and the riders slowed as they got closer. The herd's voices reverberated across the plains, and Midnight knew the firm and authoritative tone. These were not ordinary travelers, but rather wranglers who were probably trying to seize wild horses for labor or sale. The riders carried ropes and lassos, and his movements were purposeful and predatory. The lead rider, a burly man with a weathered face and a wide-brimmed hat, pointed toward Midnight. He said, "He's the one we want, and that too fetches a good price for both." His voice was audible even from a distance, and as the riders prepared to circle the herd, Midnight let out a piercing neigh, a rallying cry for the herd to stay together. The first rider swung his lasso, aiming for one of the mares. Midnight charged forward, his hooves thundering against the ground as he intercepted the rope in midair, and his sheer force drove the rider's horse back. The wrangler cursed, yanking the lasso back and readying it again. A familiar figure emerged at the edge of the plains, and the enemy, alarmed by the noise, staggered as it attempted to follow the moving herd. The rogue coyote, Ember, had been observing from the tree line. Her keen eyes and keen instincts sensed danger, and she quickly darted across the grass, weaving through the chaos with surprising speed. Ember's voice cut through the noise like a warning siren, and she let out a series of sharp, piercing yips. The riders hesitated, startled by the sudden appearance of the coyote, and her quick movements unnerved the larger animals. The horses reared their riders, struggling to maintain control, so that Midnight led the herd in a coordinated charge, their combined strength forcing the riders to retreat. The stallion's presence was commanding for a moment, and the herd was inspired to stand their ground by his powerful frame and unwavering courage. Ember continued her fearless attack, snapping and barking at the riders. Her small form provided a surprising force against the human intruders, realizing they were outmaneuvered. The lead rider shouted a retreat, and the wranglers pulled back their horses, galloping away in a cloud of dust in the middle of the night, and the herd watched them vanish over the horizon, their presence a stark reminder of the dangers. The coyote stood panting, her golden coat streaked with dirt, but her posture triumphant. The boar, now calmer, nuzzled, and that still lurked as the dust settled at midnight. His deep eyes were filled with thanks. With every second that goes by, its tiny body trembles less against Midnight's side. Ember releases a gentle whine. That night, the herd slept under a blanket of stars, their unity greater than ever. Midnight stood and watched as his eyes scanned the darkened horizon, and the UFO slept soundly, her tail wagging gently before retreating to the edge of the plains. The herd had settled into the safety of the plains, but as Midnight couldn't get rid of the feeling that the riders would return, Would Ember's unexpected loyalty continue to protect them, or would the herd face an even greater threat? Thoughts of Ember's bravery and actions lingered. At his feet, its soft breaths were a testament to the resilience that had carried it through so much. Under the vast sky, the herd grazed cautiously, their movements synchronized as they stayed close to one another. Midnight stood on a small rise, his dark figure silhouetted against the golden light of dawn, his keen eyes scanning. The stillness of the plains was misleading, providing a false sense of security. The horizon knew that the wranglers would not give up lightly, and every muscle in his body ached from the recollection of them. The maze kept watch over it, creating a living barrier that protected the youngest member of the herd, but even with their attention to detail, the sense of impending danger grew stronger with every second that passed. The foe, now a little stronger, but still fragile, remained close to Midnight, its small frame leaning against the step-eon for comfort. Just before noon, the distant sound of hoops broke the delicate peace. This time, the riders were better prepared and came in a tighter formation. Their horses moved with purpose and precision, and the lead rider, with his wide-brimmed hat shading his determined eyes, carried a sharp whistle in one hand and a coiled lasso in the other. The herd responded instantly. A piercing no at midnight prompted the group to move, and Mars surrounded them, blowing up dust as they got ready to run. However, the riders were faster this time, and they fanned out to block the herd's escape routes. Midnight charged at the nearest rider, his powerful frame causing a blur of motion as the rider's horse reared up and his hooves slicing through the air. From the edge of the plains, a familiar figure emerged, Ember the rogue coyote, who darted out of the tree line with lightning speed. Her small frame moved with lightning speed, and she barked sharply, attracting the rider's attention. The wrangler horses were uneasy due to the sudden appearance of the high-pitched. The lead rider barked under his breath, clearly frustrated. "We'll take the stallion first," gesturing to his men as he yipped, making them buck and dodge uncomfortably. At midnight, two riders concentrated on using their lassos. The first lasso touched his FL's shoulder, but he fell short as he turned abruptly, surprising the riders' expectations. Midnight, spinning in sweeping arcs above their heads, avoided the first lasso with flawless movements amid the turmoil. By darting between the riders' horses, grabbing at their heels and forcing them to break formation, Ember attempted to divert the riders. Her actions allowed the herd to reassemble in a matter of critical seconds, as the Mars, propelled by maternal instinct, pushed the foal toward a narrow path that led to the safety of a nearby rock outcrop. When Midnight saw the herd moving, he gave a strong neigh, telling them to follow the trail. He then returned his attention to the riders, his piercing eyes blazing with defiance. Ember joined him, her small frame standing firmly next to the towering stallion, and the two of them formed a barrier of courage that the riders could not easily cross, but the wranglers were keeping up the lead. With a coiled rope in one hand, and his boots crunching on the parched grass, the rider dismounted and approached on foot, his motion slow and predatory. Midnight pawed the ground, his ears pinned back, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Just as the tension reached its peak, a herd of wild mustangs appeared from the direction of the rocky outcrop. Their M's flowed like banners in the wind, and the sound of their hooves was thunderous. The wranglers froze, their faces going pale as they realized they were outnumbered. The mustangs charged toward the wranglers, and their leader, a massive gray stallion, joined the charge, his black coat shimmering in the sunlight as he led the counterattack. Ember followed immediately behind her, and her harsh barks added to the noise. The wranglers were forced to flee, scrambling onto their horses, their plans in ruins as the combined might of the wild mustangs and Midnight's herd drove them away. The lead rider turned back once. Before vanishing, they were twisted in frustration. As the dust settled, the wild mustang came to a stop over the horizon. Their leader looked respectfully at Midnight, and the gray stallion gave a low neigh before guiding his herd back toward Ember, trotted to his side, her tail bouncing as she looked up at him with silent triumph. The foe, now secure among the mares, let out a faint cry as Midnight stood tall on the rocky outcrop, his chest heaving, but his spirit intact. Winnie Midnight approached, lowering his head to nuzzle the foe. Gently the danger had passed, but the memory of the battle lingered, a reminder of the strength found in unity and the courage of unexpected allies as the herd settled once more. Midnight couldn't ignore the bond forming between his herd and the wild Mustangs. Could their alliance hold the key to facing even greater challenges in the future? The plains were still a quiet serenity, settling over the land in the aftermath of the dramatic confrontation. Midnight stood at the crest of a hill, the wind ruffling his dark mane as he watched the wild Mustangs retreat toward the horizon. Their leader, the massive gray stallion, paused briefly to glance back. The silent exchange between the two stallions was brief but profound, a shared understanding of mutual respect and the strength found in solidarity. The herd began to regroup, the tension easing as they returned to grazing. The foe, now resting under the watchful eyes of the mares, seemed calmer, its small body finally relaxing after the relentless dangers of the past days. Midnight made his way toward the foe, his steady presence a reassurance to the youngest member of the herd. He nuzzled the foe gently, his deep, calming breaths conveying that they were safe for now. Once more, Midnight came up to her, bending his head slightly in acknowledgment, and Ember released a faint sigh. Ember, the renegade coyote, lingered at the periphery of the group, her golden coat streaked with mud, but her posture was one of calm pride. She had done her part, proven her loyalty, her tail wagging as she met his gaze. It was an unlikely alliance, but one that had saved them all. As the sun sank below the horizon, turning the plains into hues of orange and purple, the herd started to settle for the night. But Midnight remained vigilant, and his sharp eyes scanned the horizon. The events of the day had demonstrated the strength of unity, but they also served as a reminder that threats could arise at any time. The following morning, the herd was startled by a sight that came from the direction of the rocky outcrop. The wild Mustangs were making their way back, and their leader moved with purpose, his massive frame leading the group toward Midnight's herd. The Mars shifted uneasily, their instincts wary of the approaching strangers. Midnight stepped forward, his powerful stride deliberate, as he met the gray stallion halfway. Imposing, but not menacing. At a time that seemed beyond words, the gray horse snorted low and looked around the herd before settling on Midnight. The Crystallion made an alliance gesture by lowering his head slightly, and the wild Mustangs started to merge with Midnight's herd. Their arrival was originally greeted with trepidation, but eventually accepted as the inquisitive and fearless foe approached one of the wild mares. Winnie, who was little, gave the mare a hesitant greeting, but the mare returned with a soft nuzzle, acknowledging the foe's innocence. Ember's keen eyes observed the developing unity between the two groups as she observed the scene from a distance. Before retreating to the edge of the plains, a satisfied yip showed that her role as an ally was not limited by proximity. She would stay close enough to defend, but far enough away to maintain her independence. Over the next few days, the combined herd started to move as one, their numbers offering security and strength. Together, the gray stallion LED and Midnight become a formidable force that can fend off any threats. As it flourished under the united herd's protection, the formerly delicate and unsure chick gained stronger every day, its tiny body filling out. The two groups' link became a symbol of resiliency and the strength of uniting in the midst of hardship. Midnight's leadership, tempered by courage and wisdom, inspired trust and loyalty among both his own herd and the wild Mustangs, the gray stallion. Strength and experience added to their collective power, creating a force that was unshakable. One evening, as the stars filled the sky, the herd rested in a wide-open meadow. The F lay nestled against midnight, its soft breaths sign of contentment. And a safety Ember sat nearby, her golden coat blending with the grass, her presence a quiet reminder of the unlikely friendships that had formed. Midnight looked out over the herd, his heart filled with pride and a sense of fulfillment. They had faced danger, endured hardship, and emerged stronger together. The plains were vast and unpredictable, but with unity and trust, they had created a sanctuary of their own. The story of Midnight Ember and the united herd spread through the region, inspiring awe and admiration. It was a tale of courage, resilience, and the extraordinary power of connection, proving that even in the wildest of landscapes, hope could thrive. If this story moved, you share it with someone who believes in the strength of unity and the power of unexpected friendships. Remember to follow, like, and subscribe for more amazing content. Stories of tenacity and bravery.